I wasn't looking for another woman. That's the first thing you should know. I was actively, aggressively, not looking. My heart was a boarded-up house, a condemned property with yellow tape strung across the front door. The last tenant had done more than just leave a mess, she'd taken a sledgehammer to the load-bearing walls on her way out. So I took what was left of me and went to the one place where solitude was the point, a remote campsite nestled deep in the spine of the mountains, where the cell signal was a myth, and the only voices were the wind in the pines and the frantic monologue in my own head. For 3 days it worked. I set up my small tent, built my lonely fires, and methodically unpacked the grief I'd been carrying for 6 months, laying each piece out on the forest floor to inspect it under the indifferent gaze of the stars. I was healing, or at least, I was cauterizing the wound with isolation. It was a quiet, functional misery. Then, on the 4th afternoon, a woman walked out of the trees. She moved with a quiet economy of motion that suggested she was as comfortable here as the deer I sometimes saw at the creek. She was tall, with strong shoulders and hair the color of dark honey pulled back in a practical braid. She stopped at the edge of my campsite, not quite intruding, her hands tucked into the pockets of her hiking shorts. I was sitting in my camp chair, pretending to be absorbed in a book I hadn't turned the page on in an hour. "Sorry to bother you," she said. Her voice was lower than I expected, calm and smooth like a river stone. "I just set up over in the next loop, and I've run into a bit of a logistical problem." I closed my book, my finger marking my non-existent spot. My social muscles had atrophied. "Oh" was the best I could manage. My internal alarm system, the one Chloe had installed and then hot-wired, was blaring. "Don't engage. Don't be nice. Niceness is a doorway." She gave a small, self-deprecating smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her eyes were a clear, startling hazel, like moss seen through water. "It's ridiculous, really. I'm on my own, and I can't quite reach the middle of my back with the sunscreen." She held up a tube of SPF 50 as evidence. "I was wondering if you'd mind." The request was so simple, so mundane, it disarmed me. It wasn't a come-on. It was a practical problem of geometry and anatomy. Still, every instinct screamed no. Letting a stranger touch me, even for something so clinical, felt like a breach of the quarantine I had so carefully constructed. But the sun was high and unforgiving, and her skin, already flushed from her hike, looked like it would burn easily. My deeply buried politeness, a relic from a former life, won out over my reflexive fear. "Sure," I heard myself say, the word feeling foreign in my mouth. "Yeah, okay." She walked closer, and the first thing I registered was her scent. It wasn't perfume. It was the clean, vital smell of pine needles, sweat, and warm earth. It was the smell of the mountain itself. She turned her back to me and handed me the tube. "Thanks. I really appreciate it." Her back was a landscape. A canvas of smooth, sun-warmed skin, freckles scattered across her shoulder blades like constellations. I squeezed a dollop of the cool, white lotion onto my palm. My fingers hesitated for a fraction of a second above her skin. This felt too intimate. More intimate than a conversation, more intimate than sharing a meal. Touching a stranger was a forgotten language. Then my fingers made contact. Her skin was soft, but beneath it, the muscles were firm and defined. She flinched just slightly at the initial coldness of the lotion. "Sorry," I mumbled. "It's okay," she said, her voice a little softer now. I began to rub the lotion in, my movements mechanical and efficient. I tried to keep it impersonal, to think of it as just a task. But my mind was a traitor, cataloging every detail. The fine, almost invisible hairs at the nape of her neck. The way a single drop of sweat traced a path down her spine. The warmth radiating from her. I was hyper-aware of the slight rasp of my callous fingertips against the silk of her skin. It had been so long since I'd touched anyone. My hands, which had built fires and pitched tents and hauled gear without complaint, suddenly felt clumsy and overlarge. I was acutely aware of her breathing, the gentle rise and fall of her ribs beneath my palms. The world narrowed to this single point of contact, the space between my hand and her back. It was a silent, charged space, and it terrified me. I finished quickly, maybe too quickly, wiping my hands on my jeans. There. All set. She turned around, that small smile returning, and this time it seemed a little more genuine. You're a lifesaver. I'm Alara, by the way. Maya, I said, my voice tight. Well, Maya, she said, her hazel eyes holding mine for a beat too long. Thanks again. I owe you one inch. She gave a little nod and then walked back the way she came, disappearing into the dense green of the forest, leaving me with the ghost of her warmth on my palms, and a profound sense of unease. The walls of my solitude had been breached. For the rest of the day, I was restless. Alara's presence lingered, an invisible hum in the quiet air. My campsite, which had felt like a sanctuary, now felt like one half of a whole. I knew her sight was just through the trees, in the next loop over, and the knowledge was a constant, low-grade distraction. I kept glancing in that direction, expecting to see her, half hoping I would and half dreading it. When I hiked down to the lake for water, I saw her sitting on a large, sun-bleached log by the shore, skipping stones across the glassy surface. She didn't see me. I watched for a moment from the cover of the trees. The way she moved, the focused set of her jaw as she selected the perfect flat stone, the fluid grace of her arm as she sent it flying across the water, it was all so competent. So self-contained. She was alone, too, but her solitude seemed different from mine. Mine was a raw, defensive crouch, hers looked like a calm, settled peace. I retreated before she could spot me, my heart thumping with an unreasonable panic. This was ridiculous. I was a grown woman, hiding from another grown woman, who had done nothing more than ask for help with sunscreen. But Chloe had taught me that the smallest gestures could be traps, that kindness could be a precursor to cruelty. See? A bitter voice in my head whispered. You can't even handle a simple human interaction. You're broken. That evening, as dusk began to bleed purple and orange through the trees, the temperature dropped. I had a good fire going, the crackle and pop of the pine logs a familiar comfort. I was staring into the flames, lost in thought, when a shadow fell over me. I looked up, startled, to see Alara standing there again, a tin mug in her hand. Smells good, she said, gesturing to the fire with her mug. Mine's being stubborn tonight. Mind if I borrow some of your warmth for a bit? Again, the simple, practical request. No hidden agenda, no game. My first instinct was to make an excuse, to guard my space, my fire, my carefully curated loneliness. But the look on her face was open and unassuming, and the night was getting colder. Saying no would be overtly hostile. Pull up a log, I said, gesturing to the spare one I used as a table. She settled herself on the other side of the fire, the flames dancing between us, painting her face in flickering shades of gold and red. We sat in silence for a few minutes, a comfortable quiet that surprised me. It wasn't the tense silence of two strangers trying to think of something to say. It was the easy silence of two people sharing a space. So what brings you all the way out here? She finally asked, her voice soft, not wanting to break the spell of the evening. The question was a landmine. I could give the easy answer, just needed a vacation, or I could tell a sliver of the truth. Something about the firelight, or the genuine curiosity in her eyes, made me choose the latter. I needed to get away from everything, I said, the words feeling inadequate. Alara didn't press. She didn't offer platitudes or ask invasive questions. She just nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on the fire. I get that, she said. Sometimes the city gets too loud. All the straight lines and right angles start to feel like a cage. She took a sip from her mug. I'm a landscape architect. I spend my days trying to force nature into tidy, predictable patterns for people. Sometimes I have to come out here to remember what it's supposed to look like. Her answer was an offering, a small piece of herself laid gently by the fire. It was an invitation to share more, but a no-pressure one. We started talking then, really talking. We talked about our jobs, my work as a freelance graphic designer, her passion for native plants. We talked about the worst camping food we'd ever made. Mine was a disastrous attempt at bannock bread that ended up as a charcoal briquette. Hers was a soup that had attracted a very determined raccoon. Her humor was dry and surprising, and once, she said something that made me let out a real, uninhibited laugh. The sound felt rusty in my throat, like an old engine turning over for the first time in years. I saw a flicker of surprise and then pleasure in her eyes. As the fire burned down to glowing embers, a comfortable intimacy had settled between us. The space that had felt so vast and empty now felt full, occupied by this shared moment. She was telling me about a trip she'd taken to see the ancient bristlecone pines, her face animated with passion. "They're just incredible," she was saying. "They don't fight the environment, they adapt to it. They let parts of themselves die off to keep the core alive. There's something to that, I think." Her words hit me with an unexpected force. Letting parts of yourself die to keep the core alive. It was a perfect description of what I had been trying to do. She had no idea how deeply her words resonated, but in that moment, I felt seen in a way I hadn't in a very long time. My walls, the ones I'd built so high and thick, had a crack in them. And through that crack, a little bit of light was getting in. Later that night, as she was getting ready to head back to her own campsite, she noticed her lantern was sputtering. "Damn it," she muttered, fiddling with the dial. "I think the mantle is shot." "Here," I said, instinctively reaching for the headlamp resting on my log. "Take this. You can give it back in the morning." I held it out to her. As she reached for it, her fingers brushed against mine. It wasn't a fleeting touch. For a split second, our hands lingered, the rough texture of her skin against mine. A jolt, sharp and undeniable, shot up my arm. It was like grabbing a live wire. I snatched my hand back as if burned. She froze, the headlamp in her hand, her eyes wide in the firelight. The air between us suddenly thickened, charged with a new and terrifying energy. The easy camaraderie of the evening evaporated, replaced by a raw, humming tension. We just stared at each other across the dying embers, the world silent except for the frantic drumming of my own heart. The question that had been unspoken all day was now hanging, visible and shimmering, in the space between us. "Thanks," she finally whispered, her voice husky. "No problem," I croaked. She turned and walked away without another word, the beam of my headlamp cutting a shaky path through the darkness. I watched until the light was gone, my whole body trembling. I sank back onto my log, wrapping my arms around myself. What was that? It was the feeling I'd been running from. The spark. The pull. The specific, terrifying, and exhilarating current that only ever happened with women. And I had sworn to myself, sworn on the wreckage of my past, that I would never, ever let myself feel it again. The next day was an exercise in mutual avoidance. I woke up feeling hungover, though I hadn't had a drop to drink. The memory of that touch, that look, was branded onto my mind. I busied myself with camp chores, meticulously organizing my gear, anything to keep my hands and mind occupied. I could hear her moving around her own campsite, the clang of a pot, the zip of a tent. We were like two magnets with the same polarity, pushing each other away, acutely aware of the invisible force field between us. I decided to hike the Long Ridge Trail, a strenuous 8-mile loop that would surely exhaust me and clear my head. 2 miles in, as I rounded a switchback, I saw her. She was sitting on a rocky outcrop, looking out at the vast expanse of the valley below. She must have started earlier than me. My heart did a painful lurch. Of all the trails on this particular day. She heard my footsteps on the gravelly path and turned. The guarded, uncertain look on her face mirrored my own. "Fancy meeting you here," she said, her attempt at lightness falling flat. "Small mountain," I replied, equally lame. An awkward silence stretched between us. I should have just nodded and kept walking, but my feet felt rooted to the spot. "It's a good view," I said, gesturing vaguely at the panorama of green and blue. "It is," she agreed quietly. I took a few steps closer, standing beside the rock she was sitting on. I wasn't ready to leave. Part of me, the stupid, traitorous part, wanted to prolong this excruciating tension. As I shifted my weight, my boot caught on a loose rock. I flailed, my arms windmilling, a clumsy spectacle of lost balance. Before I could fall, her hand shot out and grabbed my forearm. Her grip was like steel. She easily pulled me upright, steadying me. We were suddenly chest to chest. Her other hand came to my waist to hold me steady. I could feel the heat of her body through my thin shirt. My hands were pressed against her shoulders, and I could feel the solid muscle beneath my palms. I looked up into her face, and my breath hitched. We were so close I could see the flecks of gold in her hazel eyes. Her scent, that pine and earth smell, was overwhelming, intoxicating. Her gaze dropped, just for a second, to my mouth. It was a fleeting, almost imperceptible movement, but I saw it. The world seemed to stop spinning. All the noise in my head went quiet. There was only the warmth of her hands on my body, the soft sound of her breathing, and the frantic beat of my own heart. This was it. The precipice. The moment where one of us would lean in or pull away. She was the one who pulled away. She let go of me slowly, her hands sliding from my arm and waist, leaving my skin tingling where she'd touched. She took a half step back, putting a crucial few inches of air between us. The spell was broken. "You okay?" she asked, her voice a little rough. "Yeah. Fine. Thanks," I stammered, my cheeks burning. "Clumsy." "It's a tricky spot," she said, though we both knew the terrain had nothing to do with what had just happened. She cleared her throat and looked back out at the view, anywhere but at me. "Well, I should probably keep moving." "Me too," I said quickly. "Long way to go." We parted ways with a strained nod, me continuing up the trail, her heading back down. I didn't look back, but I felt her eyes on me until I rounded the next bend. The rest of the hike was a blur. My mind wasn't on the trail, it was replaying those 30 seconds over and over again. The feel of her hands, the look in her eyes, the almost kiss that hung in the air. The fear was back, cold and sharp, but this time it was mixed with a powerful, undeniable yearning. By the time I got back to my campsite, the sky had turned a bruised, ominous gray. The wind had picked up, and the pines were swaying violently, their needles whispering warnings. The weather report had promised clear skies, but the mountains had their own rules. The air grew heavy and thick with the smell of rain. The first drops were huge, splattering against the dirt like fat, dark tears. Then the heavens opened. It wasn't just rain, it was a deluge, a solid sheet of water that blurred the entire world. The wind howled, and a sudden, violent gust hit my tent broadside. I heard a sickening crack, and the whole structure sagged, then collapsed in on itself, the wet nylon trapping me in a dark, suffocating heap. Panic seized me. I scrambled, trying to find the zipper, tangled in fabric and guy lines. Just as I was about to claw my way out, the flap was ripped open from the outside. It was Alara, her face streaked with rain, her eyes wide with alarm. "Maya. Are you okay?" she yelled over the roar of the storm. I think so." A pole snapped. "Come on," she shouted, grabbing my hand and pulling me out of the wreckage. "You can't stay here. Come to my tent." She half-dragged me through the blinding rain to her campsite. Her tent, a sturdier-looking dome, was holding firm against the onslaught. We tumbled inside, zipping the flap shut against the storm. The roar of the wind and rain was slightly muffled now, but the sound of thunder cracked directly overhead, making the ground tremble. We were both soaked to the bone, shivering, kneeling on the floor of the small tent, the space impossibly close. Water dripped from our hair and clothes, cooling on the nylon floor. And then, in the middle of the chaos, my phone, which I'd shoved in my pocket, buzzed. I pulled it out, surprised to see a single bar of service flickering. It was my sister. I answered, my teeth chattering. Maya. Oh, thank God. I saw the weather alert for your area. Are you okay? I'm fine, Sarah. It's pretty bad, but I'm okay. Listen, I know this is a bad time, but Chloe called me again. She's asking if you're getting my messages. She sounds really, I don't know, upset. The name hit me like a physical blow. Chloe. My ex. The architect of my ruin. Hearing her name in this small, fragile shelter with Alara felt like a violation. A ghost appearing at the feast. I saw the shift in Alara's expression. She heard the name, saw the visceral flinch that went through my body. Tell her to stop calling you Sarah. Please. I have to go, I said, and ended the call, my hand shaking. I stared at the dark screen of my phone, the storm outside a pale imitation of the one raging inside me. Are you okay? Alara's voice was very gentle, cutting through the noise. And that was it. The gentleness. The concern. The perfect storm of proximity, fear, and raw emotion. I broke. A sob tore its way out of my chest, ragged and ugly. The tears I'd been holding back for months, for years, finally came. I can't do this again, I whispered, the words tumbling out. I can't. She broke me. I let someone in, and she just shattered everything. I came up here to swear it off, to just be alone, because it's safer. And then you showed up and I'm so scared. I didn't look at her. I just stared at my trembling hands, confessing my deepest fears to the floor of the tent. I expected her to shift away, to be put off by the mess, the raw, unfiltered crazy. Instead, I felt a gentle touch on my arm. I looked up. Alara had moved closer, her face etched with a profound, heartbreaking empathy. You don't have to be afraid with me, Maya, she said, her voice a low, steady anchor in the storm. And I believed her. In that moment, I believed her more than I had ever believed anything. The last of my defenses crumbled into dust. I leaned forward, closing the small gap between us, and pressed my lips to hers. It was a kiss born of desperation and relief. It was rain and salt and the lingering taste of fear. Her lips were soft, hesitant at first, and then she was kissing me back, her hand coming up to cup my jaw, her thumb stroking my cheek. The kiss deepened, becoming something else entirely. It wasn't about the past or Chloe or the fear. It was about the two of us in a tent, in a storm, finding a point of stillness in the chaos. When we finally pulled apart, we were both breathless, resting our foreheads against each other. The storm still raged outside, but inside the small, fragile space of the tent, it was quiet. We spent the night huddled together in her sleeping bag for warmth. It wasn't about sex, it was about survival, about a profound and primal need for human closeness. I fell asleep to the sound of her steady breathing, and the drumming of rain on nylon, feeling safer than I had in years. When I woke, the storm had passed. Sunlight streamed through the tent flap, and the air was washed clean, smelling of wet earth and ozone. Alara was already awake, watching me, a soft, questioning look in her eyes. The awkward morning after. My tent is ruined, I said, the first thing that came to mind. I know, she said, her voice still thick with sleep. She reached out and tucked a stray piece of hair behind my ear. Her touch was feather-light, deliberate. Let me help you pack up what's left of your gear. And then, we can figure out the next step. Together. That one word, together, settled everything. It was a promise. We worked in a comfortable silence, breaking down my wrecked campsite. There was a new lightness between us, punctuated by small smiles and shared glances. As we wrestled my soggy, collapsed tent into its bag, I slipped in the mud, and she caught me, and this time we both laughed. It was easy. We packed everything into our respective cars. Standing in the quiet morning air between the two vehicles felt like another choice, another precipice. This was the moment we could say our goodbyes, exchange numbers, and promise to call, promises that often fade with distance. But Alara just looked at me, her keys dangling from her finger. She didn't say anything. She just waited. I looked at my car, the symbol of my escape, my solitude. Then I looked at hers. And I knew what I wanted. So I said, a smile playing on my lips. My car or yours? The relief that washed over her face was beautiful. Mine, she said, without hesitation. I know a place that has the best coffee on the way back to the city. My treat. I walked over, leaving my own car behind for now. As I slid into her passenger seat, the cab filled with her scent, that familiar mix of pine and earth and something that was uniquely her, I knew I wasn't running away from anything anymore. I was driving towards something. It was terrifying, and it was uncertain, and it was the most hopeful I had felt in a very long time. Sometimes, you go into the wilderness to lose yourself, but if you're really lucky, you find something better. How do you know when to trust again, when to open a door you swore you'd bolted shut forever? If you've ever had to make that choice, let me know in the comments. And don't forget to like this story and subscribe for more.